Okay, so today let's talk about cultural reporting, because there seems to be a current in contemporary journalism that skews towards journalists and reporters covering their issues of culture over other journalists. It's a kind of obtuse way of saying that, like, there is a shift towards having people of the same cultural background cover that story. So if the story or the subject is a black person, then a black person should cover it. You know, they're talking about a Native American tribe, as like Standing Rock, then the real authoritative voices of journalists should be Native American journalists, and they're the ones that should really be covering this story and interviewing the subjects. And I want to posit this is not the best idea for journalism. You know, to quote Martin Luther King Jr., I would like to be judged not color of my skin, but on the content of my character. And I think that's true in any sort of area of life where you want to make good work, right? That good work should be dependent on who's best at it, not, who shares a cultural affinity per se. Now, if somebody shares a cultural affinity with the subject or the story as a reporter, that may help and may make them a better reporter, but that doesn't necessarily de facto make them a better reporter about X or Y. And this catalyzed my brain after a little New York Times story, a little hubbub. But New York Times ran a story about a white woman who opened up a Chinese restaurant in New York, and then the restaurant got a bunch of backlash, and the story was covering this event. And one of the critiques I saw about this was actually, one, oh, why is this white woman, opening a Chinese restaurant? Two, why is this not being reported by an Asian American? Why is the reporter white or just not Asian American? And I thought, like, well, wait a minute, why should that matter? Right? Why would some Asian American have any better insight into the story, or getting the interviews, or getting people to talk over somebody who's Native American or Indian or black? Right? That inherent cultural thing shouldn't matter. Right? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but that alone shouldn't matter. And on top of that, the New York Times article in particular was talking about a Chinese restaurant, and the criticism was like, why isn't an Asian American reporter covering this? And I thought, well, wait a minute, like, your race is Asian, right? But that we're talking about a Chinese restaurant, so that'd be culturally Chinese. So take me for an example, right? My race is white, my culture is, who really knows, English, German, Scottish. I'm not very in touch with my cultures. I guess my culture would just be American. But there's a difference between race and culture, one. So if you really wanted to make the argument that people were making, I would say, like, well, wait, it's not Asian American, right? Shouldn't a Chinese person then be covering this Chinese restaurant story? Is that the argument you're really making? As if somehow a Chinese person is more qualified to tell this story and get the interviews than anybody else? I don't buy that idea. Reporting, just like anything else in a free market, usually goes to the best people at the job, right? And that doesn't really have anything to do with culture. Just as like a straight cisgendered woman or male can cover, transgender issues, and vice versa. The argument once again is made like, well, a straight cis person can't really cover a transgender story because they can't, identify with the subject. It should be a person of trans or LGBTQ covering LGBTQ stories. But then if you reverse it, it doesn't work, right? So, like, if the subject of a story is a straight, man, does that mean a straight man has to cover that subject, right? Like, if a trans journalist wants to, like, write a story about this straight male, for instance, who just happens to be doing something interesting or terrible, whatever, pick your flavor, does that mean they can't then cover it because they can't identify with straight maleness? I don't think so. But nonetheless, this is a shift I see happening in journalism where, a story will pop up in a newsroom and it'll be about, some black woman somewhere, and they'll be like, okay, we should assign our black reporter, hey, you're the best for the job, John, go do it. When it's like, well, wait a minute, maybe John is an entertainment reporter. Just because he's black is not going to make him any better at telling this investigative story just because the subject is also black, right? And vice versa. Just, me being able to interview, people down on Wall Street because I look like them, I'm very WASP-ish looking. Like, does that make me more qualified to interview Jamie Dimon or anybody? I don't think so, right? Like, the transgender person that knows their finances and economics should be just as qualified and just as, willing to tell the story or the subject in a newsroom as me. Like, I just don't buy it, and it's an interesting cultural shift I see happening in newsrooms, at least in New York City and LA and other major cities. Something to think about, because certainly we don't do this in any other area of journalism. Like, Lord knows, journalists covering science and technology stories do not have a background in science most of the time, and my goodness would it help their quality of stories. Because a lot of times you have journalists covering things in science, whether it be black holes recently or whatever it may be, and they know nothing about black holes. They don't even know how to describe it. They don't even know what an event horizon is. So we're not going to apply the same, standard and rigor of saying, well, only people with a background in astrophysics can cover a story on the black hole. Then we shouldn't apply the same rigor of like, well, only a transgender person can cover a transgender story, and only a Chinese person can cover a Chinese story, right? It just doesn't hold up. Anyway, I'll see you guys tomorrow.